Lamed days on the day, but I'll do a tiny bit of a review over here. The Tanakama in the Brisa said that he interpreted the pasuk that the word zakein modifies the word saba, so you only have to stand for an elderly Talmud Chacham who's also a shtickle tzaddik. Okay, the Rabbi Yossi HaGalili interpreted it, the pasuk, that you have to stand for a Saba under all circumstances. As I mentioned once before, this machlekes, whether that's 60 or 70. For the purpose of standing, we interpret it as 70. You stand for even a bad guy, and we'll see, even a non-Jew. A Zokain, so therefore he covers everybody with Saba. So what does he do with Zokain? Even a 25 or 30-year-old Kohler younger man who knows gobs and gobs of Torah and comports himself in an honorable manner, he can have the appellation Zokain, and one should stand for him. We also discussed being Michael, and so on. Now we're at the last line over here. We reviewed the Tanakama, Mishum Deboy Lemismach Zakein V'yorei. So he wants to link Zakein with fear of God, so the Zakein has to be one who represents fear of God. But Tanakama, my time, why does he say that they're two separate things? If you want to interpret it as two separate things like Rav Yossi Galili does, Imkain, if you want to do that, Nichtav Rahman, the Torah should have worded the pasuk a little differently. Mipnei seva takum vahadarta. In front of an old man, you should rise and show honor. Vahadarta takum vahadarta mipnei zaken. And you should also rise and show covet for a scholar. Midalo kasav hachi, but the pasuk isn't like that. Therefore, shmamina achadhu. So Tanakama says Saba and Zakein. Zakein modifies Saba, and it's only one person, one group of people. Amar Mar. So now we're going to continue, go weiter in that Bryce. So we're going to do each line of the Bryce and talk about it. Yachol Yahad Mammon. Bryce says maybe we should have guessed or had a Havamina that when it says honor somebody, you should do things that cost you money. You should buy him gifts. You should give him a present, whatever. Talmud Lomer Tokum Vahadarta. We have the word stand and give honor, and we make a hekesh over here. Ma kima she'en bo chisron kis. Just as rising normally doesn't cost you anything. Af hider she'en bo chisron kis. So too, showing honor normally shouldn't cost you anything. V'kima lesbo chisron kis. So Gemara asks, what are you talking about? That rising never costs you anything. Now you notice I had said usually, and now it's implying always. Mi lo askinin de konokiv marganisa. If a skilled workman is sitting at his workbench and he's drilling holes in pearls to string them on a piece of silk, right? And adahachi v'hakayim mikaime. And now he has to get up because a zaken is walking past him. And in that few minutes or few seconds, he has to interrupt his work and go back maybe and start over. So his output is significantly diminished if he has to stand up every time a zaken walks by. Okay? And therefore he's losing money. So you see that money could be involved. Ella Akish Kimala Hidur. We say, as I mentioned, we make a hekesh between Hidur and rising and honoring. Ma Hidur Shein Babitul. When you, by honoring someone, you don't have to interrupt your work. You can just nod to him, or you could just smile at him. Sha'af kima she'en babitul. And if the kima would conflict with work, you don't have to rise. The rising cannot entail interrupting your work. The ikish nami hidu kima, and we do it the other way around as well. Ma kima she'en b'chisron kis, since rising under normal circumstances don't cost you anything. So too, it doesn't cost you anything to have a hadras panim, to be pleasant and show honor, respectful to a zaken or a saba, depending on the Tanakama and Rav Yesh. Okay. So based on what we've just learned, that it can't cost you anything. Mikan Amro, based on that, the rabbis told us, Ein batle umanuyos v'sha'a she'oiskin b'mlachteichem. Russian mitnei Talmud Torah b'shas she'oiskin b'mlachteichem. A workman who's doing skilled work where interrupting will delay him and he's being paid by the piece, say, so he would actually lose money, is not allowed to stand. It does not, has reshus not to, he's not allowed to. Because if he's working for someone else, the time he takes to stand, he's actually stealing from his boss. Okay, and if he works for himself, he's stealing from himself. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? I bring you a case in a Mishnah where workmen are required to interrupt what they're doing and stand to show covet. And we have a Mishnah on Erev Shavuos when the farmers have their decorated animals and their fancy baskets, and they make this parade to the Beis Hamikdash. Called by Le Umanuyos, Oimdim Bifnehem. All the craftsmen in the city of Jerusalem are obligated to rise, and when the crowd, when the parade reaches them. Vishawilim Bishlamam. Not only that, they're required to have a dialogue with them. How are you doing? Everything good? Was the trip successful? V'oimrim lahem, and you have to say to them, Achenu anshe makom ploini, my dear friends, my brethren, who came from Stom or who came from Lud or wherever it is they came from, Boachem l'shalom. I hope come to Jerusalem in peace. So this is a contradiction, Mistama, to don't stand and interrupt your work. So Omer Rav Yochanan, bifneihem oimdim, on Erev Shavuos, when they're coming with their bikurim, you have to rise and engage in conversation. Mipnei talmidei chachamim ein oimedin. But you do not rise for just Talmud Chacham during Hanukkah. And in other words, this is a one-time deal because of the significance of the mitzvah of Bikurim. Okay? Amar Rav Yossi bar Avin, Bovere Kama Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. Come and see from this example how dear we should hold, how beloved we should hold mitzvahs to be when we do them at the proper time. Okay? So because shahayu mifnehem oimdim, because they rose up and gave cover to the parade of farmers bringing their bikurim, mipnei Talmud Chacham ein oimdim, but they don't rise for Talmud Chacham. So you see someone doing a mitzvah, they rise, and someone who's a Talmud Chacham, you may not have to rise. So the Gemara says, Dilma Shani Hasam. Maybe it has nothing to do with the fact that they're doing a mitzvah. Maybe the reason we stand for them is because schlepping to Jerusalem with your Bikurim, it's only a 2-day holiday. You're not even coming for a week, or it's actually a 1-day holiday. And you could be traveling 5 days to go there for 1 day and 5 days home. And you might not feel like coming, but when you get to Jerusalem and they make such a big deal out of you, you feel the trip was worth it, okay? The imkain, if they did not stand for them, we might, by ignoring them coming to Jerusalem, we might be giving them a disincentive to come next year. Next, we're going weiter again in the Brisa. Omar Mar, Yachol Ya'amid B'fanav B'beis HaKisei B'beis HaMerchatz. I might have thought that even in an outhouse, or in a mikvah or public bath, you should still stand for Talmud Chacham. The Mishnah, we learned the pasuk says you don't have to. Oh, you don't have to? Rabbi Chia, Hava Yesev Be Maschusa. Rav Chia was sitting in the bathhouse. V'chalef Azil Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, and Rab Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, walked by or was walking in, whichever. V'lo mekaime, and Rav Chia, thinking that the halacha is you don't have to stand, remained seated. Did, and Reb Shimon got pissed off. V'asa amar le'lavua, and when he went home, Reb Shimon said to his father, Shnei chumashim shenisi lo b'sefer tehillim. I taught Rav Chia 40% of Sefer Tehillim, and yet the law Amid Befonai, I'm his Rebbe, and he didn't stand up in front of me. Vasu, a second little story. Bar Kapara, the Amrile, Reb Shmuel, Bar Rebbe Yosef, somebody, either Bar Kapara or Reb Shmuel. Hava Yosef Be Maskusa. He was sitting in the bathhouse. Alva Azil Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, the same Reb Shimon, showed up and walked into the bathhouse below Kum Mekaime, and Bar Kapara, or whoever it was, did not stand. The Ikpid, and once again Reb Shimon got upset. He told his father, Shnei Shlishe Shlish Vishnasi Bo B'Taras Kahanim. I taught him, it turns out 22%. Okay, 2/9. I taught him 22% of Leviticus, of Sefer Kahanim, and the law Amedufnai, and he didn't stand up for me. So his father said to him, now this is a tip-off to the circumstance. The Amrlo, his father said to him, Shema Bahem Yoshev Umaharhe. Maybe he was sitting and reviewing in his mind the material you taught him.
Now, this means you're allowed to do that in a...
Well, I said this is a tip-off.
Okay. Not good.
Typically, a mikveh or a bathhouse has 2 sections. There's the outer chamber, and then there's the space where the swimming pool or the mikveh is. So the inner portion, people are naked. The outer portion, which has a door between them, people are not naked. So for sure, you're not supposed to speak Torah even in the outer chamber because people are starting to undress, etc. But you are allowed to think Torah for sure. And we'll see in a second, it may even be that it's not so terrible if you continue thinking Torah in the inner chamber. Okay, we're going to go into all of that. That's why I said this is a tip off to the circumstance. Time at the Behem Yoshev B'Maharher. Maybe he was sitting and thinking about Torah. Ha lav hachi loy. Because that was sufficiently distracting that he didn't notice you come in. But otherwise, there's no excuse for him not rising for you in the outer chamber. Below kasha, we do not have a contradiction. Ha b'bote gave. Here we're talking when you're naked and you're in the inner part and you don't have to show covered. We're talking about the room with the actual mikveh or the bathtub, the big swimming pool that every communal bathing took place in. Here, where he was thinking Torah, and that's why he didn't rise, or if he wasn't thinking Torah, he must rise, is talking about the outer chamber. Okay, where people normally still have their clothes on. V'hanami mistabra, and that makes sense that we're talking about the outer chamber. The Omer Rava bar Rav Chana, Omer of Yochanan, b'chol makom moter laharher. You're allowed to think Torah virtually everywhere, chutz mi beis hamerchatz u'beis hakisei, except in a bathhouse where you're in the room with the boar, or in a bathroom where there are open, latrine. They used to have just a board with a hole in it. Actually, Rav Henkin Zatzal, who was the main posek in the United States before Rav Moshe, he was a Das Yachid on this, but he held that in our toilets where you can put the toilet seat down, there's no problem. And that because a lot of people hold from him halacha l'maisa because the halacha actually is every single time you walk into the bathroom, you want to get a tissue to blow your nose, you have to wash your hands. But if you're makpid to put the seat down, then you can be Saimech and Rav Henkin and not wash your hands every time. All right. So the Dilma, now there's another excuse for thinking. Dilma le unse shine. Maybe if it's an ones, it's different. So here what ones means. If you're reviewing today's daf and you have it down pretty close to cold and you're going through in your mind the shachla v'tar, and you walk into the mikveh, it's not always possible to shut your mind down. It's often the case that whatever you were thinking about, and the more you try to shut your mind down, the less it works. That's what happens to me when I try to go to sleep. I try to make my mind a blank, and all of a sudden it's full of everything I did all day. So if it's an oines, you can even think in the merchatz. I hope that answers your question, Bob. Yeah. Now, Brisa went on. We're picking up another line from the Brisa. Yachol ya'at semeinav. Maybe you could close your eyes. You see the Talmud Chacham. The rule is within 4 damas of you, about 8 feet. So you see him about 10 feet away and you don't want to have to get up. So you close your eyes, or you put your hand, or you turn the other direction and pretend you didn't notice him. Kamishalo Rahu, as if he didn't see him in the first place. Ato Barishoy Askinan. Are we talking about evil people that would pretend they didn't see the gadol? Ella, what we mean here is Yachol Ya'atzim Einav Mekame delimtes man chayva. I might think that I can circumvent the rule by closing my eyes or turning away prior to the obligations beginning when he's 20 feet away and he's walking in this direction. Dechi matazman chiyuva, to avoid causing the need of the obligation. So if you don't see him, okay, the common that you don't have to stand. Talmud Lama, Tokum the Yoresa. You can't pull that kind of shtick. You must stand if you're obligated to stand, because that's showing fear for the Torah and therefore fear for the Rabbanah Shalom. Now, Tana, we're going to ask, what does it mean to stand? Okay? Ezahu kima sheyesh bo hirhur. Hidur. What is the kind of standing that shows covet to the person you're standing for? Havi Amer, I would tell you, Zed Dalit Amos. It means stand when the person you're showing honor to is within Dalit Amos. So it's 6 to 8 feet. Here you'd go Lachumra, it would be 8 feet. Okay? Amar Abaya, Lo Amran Ela Barabo She'enu Muvhak. This Dalit Amos rule is for any old rabbi, not your Rebbe Muvhak. Okay? Aval Barabo HaMuvhak, but if he's your primary Rav. Now that's complicated a little bit. It's if you're in yeshiva, it's the Rosh Yeshiva. But I know a Rosh Yeshiva who held his second grade Rebbe was his Rebbe Muvhak, because he's the one that taught him to read. And all his learning thereafter was in the schus of the second grade Rebbe. So he literally treated his second grade Rebbe as a Rebbe Muvhak. Okay, Mula Einav. If it's a Rebbe Muvhak, you must stand as soon as he becomes visible and remain standing. It's debatable. Okay? Abaya Mechihava Hazele Adune de Chamra de Rav Yosef Yossi Have Kayim. Rav Abaya would jump up the minute he saw the donkey's ear on which his Rebbe was riding. So in other words, if you know your Rosh Yeshiva has a black Buick, you'd stand up as the black Buick approaches you. Abaya have a Rachiv Chamra, so he mentioned a donkey, so we'll do more donkey talk. Abaya was riding on a donkey, V'ko maske Aguda de Nahar Sagya. He was on one bank. He was riding on the sand or on the path on one side of the Saga River. V'yesev Rav Misharshia v'Rabban v'Idach Gisa, and Rav Sharsha and a bunch of other rabbis were seated on the bank opposite him on the other side of the river. Okay, the low kamu, they didn't get up when he came by. Amelahu, so Abaya shouted out across the river, Lav Rabbi Muvhak, am I not your Rebbe Muvhak? V'amrule, and they shouted back to him, Lav Adaitin, we didn't notice you. So now we're getting a new halacha. If you're sitting and learning, you need not interrupt your learning to stand for a Rebbe. Now, in yeshivas, they all interrupted their learning and stood for the Rosh Yeshiva. Okay. Rav Shimon bar Elazar, Aimer minayin lazaken shelo yitriach. The next statement in the Brisa, we had this before. How do we know that if possible, if it's not inconvenient for him, the person who knows everybody's going to interrupt what they're doing and stand for him should walk in a circuitous route so he avoids giving them the obligation to stand. We had that. Okay, and that's repeating it from the Brisa. Talmud Lomer, Zaken v'yoresa. You should honor the Zaken and show thereby that you fear God. Since the word Zaken and Yoresa are next to each other in the pasuk, that teaches the Zaken himself should fear God. And therefore, he should minimize the tircha he causes to others to interrupt what they're doing. Amar Abaya, naktinan de'i makif hachayet. We have naktinan means we have a Messiah. We have a Messiah that if a Talmud Chacham tries to avoid being honored, even if it takes him on a different route, which is longer, his life will be extended in that schus. Abaya Makif, and Abaya always took a roundabout route. Reb Zera Makif, and Reb Zera also took a roundabout route. Ravina Hava Yasiv Kaime de Rav Yirmiyah Mibdifta. Ravina was sitting in front of Rav Yirmiyah from Difti. Halacha hu gavra Kaime de lo michse reshe. And a person walked by who did not have a hat or yarmulke on. Omar Ravina said, Mistama, Kama Chatzif Hagavra, what a chutzpah guy this is. Omar Le Ravina says, now, there are two concepts here. Number one, in the Goyim, they tip their hat to somebody. It's a sign of respect. So it could be something like that. Or it could be that, even if you don't normally cover your head, if you're approaching a bunch of rabbis, you grab the yarmulke out of your pocket and slap it on your head as a showing respect. So it has something to do both with uncovered head and respect. Okay? Kama Chatziv Hagavra, what a chutzpah guy that is. So Amar Le, Yirmiyah tries to defend the guy. Dilma, maybe he comes from the town of Mechasya. So Mechasya then was sort of like Lakewood today. Just about everybody that walks by is a big Talmud Chacham. So if you live there, it becomes sort of natural to lower the level of respect. I mean, you can't constantly be standing, and so we cut him some slack. He lives in a town where everybody is a rabbi, and there's no hay there to be Michael their covet. Okay, weiter in the Brisa. Isa ben Yehuda Omer mipnei seva tokum, you rise for an old man, any old man. The afilu kol seva mashma, that means any old man. Omer Rav Yochanan halacha ki Isa ben Yehuda. The halacha is you stand for any man who appears old, or in our case, appears significantly older than we are, except Zeb, whose Michael is covered. Rav Yochanan have koi mekame de sabe de aramai. Rav Yochanan would stand even for a non-Jewish old man. Omar, and this is very meaningful, this next line. Omar kama hafake adu, alaihu dahane. These people, I'm going to translate it, have great life experience. Rashi says that anybody who's old enough survived illnesses, survived potential accidents. In other words, any person who's old enough, Jew, non-Jew, male, female, experienced miracles in his life and therefore is deserving of covet. Rabba make him lo ko'e huder aved lahu. Rava did not particularly stand for them, but he did show them covered in other ways. Now the Mefarshim there they did this, that little bit rising in the seat stick. Okay, Abaya Yahiv Yoda Lesave. Abaya would offer his arm to support an older person. He was a Boy Scout taking the old lady across the street. Problem was she didn't want to cross the street. Okay. Rava Mishader Shiluche. Rava, he didn't interrupt what he was doing. He felt he deserved covet, but he had his attendants go and help the old lady across the street. Rav Nachman Mishadeh Gazoi. Rav Nachman was married into the Rosh Galisa's house, and he had soldiers from the Roman soldiers assigned to protect, like the Secret Service. So he would send one of his protectors to help the old person. Okay? And he commented, Omer ilav Torah kama Nachman barava ika b'shuka. In other words, if everybody learned Torah like they were supposed to, everybody would be a big Talmid Chacham, and nobody would have to help anybody else or show covet for anybody else. All right. Amarav Evo, Amarav Yanai, turn the page. Ein Talmid Chacham Rashai Lamod Mipnei Rabo. We do not hold like this, but a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, is not allowed to rise for his Rebbe. Now, presumably, this is not Rebbe Muvak. Okay? Ella Shachris Va'arvis, except twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. My children, I'm not a Talmid Chacham, but my children stand for me when they first see me in the morning, and then I'm going to bed or something, they stand then. So what's pshat over here? Kedei shelo yeh kvodai meruba mekavod shemayim. Because if you're popping up every time the rabbi walks in, you're showing him more respect than you do God. You only say Kriya Shema once in the morning and once at night. So therefore, we want to minimize the times you stand for your Rebbe, according to this memra, to be an equivalent of how you show respect for God. Meisvei, but they argue with that. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Minayin Lezaken Shelo Yatriach. Remember, we just learned earlier that a zaken should not be matriach other people to rise for him. So that is an indication, Talmud Lomer Zaken Yerei also, that the old person should also fear God. So this is talking about all day long. If you're only talking about morning and night, Amilo Nitres. How do we say he's bothering somebody? It's 2:00 in the afternoon. He knows they're not going to have to stand for him now, so he should walk right through the crowd. Okay? So Elalav Kule Yuma. So based on that previous line in this brisa, we make the decision that rising is not limited to twice a day. Okay. So the Gemara says maybe that logic is wrong. Maybe it really is only morning and night. Nevertheless, that the Rebbe should sort of teach himself not to be matriach people by not creating an environment where someone might have to show him covet if possible. Okay, new issue. Amar Rav Elazar kol talmid chacham she'ein oimid b'fnei rabo any talmid. Now this is in contradistinction to the one who says you're not supposed to. Kol talmid chacham she'ein oimid b'fnei rabo, a talmid chacham who does not rise for his rebbe nikra Russia is called evil. The einu marich yomim, and he will not live a long life. The Talmudo mishtakeyach, he'll also forget whatever he learned. Shenemar v'tuv lo yeh Russia, good will not be for a Russia, and here good means Torah. Okay, v'lo yarich yomim, and he won't live very long. Ketzel shenemar, we have a pasuk that we now are interpreting in a metaphorical way. Ketzel asher enenu yirei milfnei ha'elokim. The wicked will not enjoy good, and shadow will not endure. His shadow, meaning his because if you're walking around, you have a shadow. If you're buried, you don't have a shadow, because he does not show fear in the presence of God. Now, Kishahu Oimer, but the pasuk says, "V'yoresa melokecha, elokecha," that you should fear God. Hare moirezu. What does fear in this context mean? Azukima, that means rising for a second. Okay. V'ema moras ribis. But there are other things we're supposed to be afraid about. Maybe it means be afraid not to lend money and charge interest. Mi'aras mishkolos. Or maybe it means be afraid that be careful to check your weights and measures if you're a shopkeeper, that you're not cheating people. Rabbi Elazar says the reason if Dafka means rising for an elder is because mipnei pnei gama. It says kom mipnei zaken, and in our pasuk it says milifnei. The word pnei is in the pasuk, so he makes a gezerah shava. Just as you fear God, you fear the elderly. And that's the specific fear we're talking about. Iboilahu, they asked the following question. Banu v'hu rabo. What if the child is the Talmud Chacham? He's his father's Rebbe. Okay, I have that problem in my family. Mahu, lama b'nei aviv, does the son still have to rise for his father? Tashma, let's look at this. The Amalei Shmuel Rav Yehuda. Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, another Amira, Shinina, Sharpie, smart guy, Kum mekaime avuch, get up, there's your father. Now, this person the father was Rav Yecheskel, and he attended Shiurim from Rav Yehuda, but he was a Talmud Chacham in his own right. Shiny Rav Yecheskel might be different. The Baal Maisim Hava. Not only was he a Talmud Chacham, but he was a big Baal Tzedakah, and he was a big Baal Chesed, and everybody in the world, in the community who knew of him, showed him covet for that reason. Even Shmuel stood up for this Rav Yecheskel. Ella my ka'amarle. So then, if that's the case, why did he rebuke the son for told him to rise? Hachi kamarle. Here's what he was really saying. Zimnan da ase ma'achorai. Occasionally, You and I could be sitting learning, and we're face to face. And your father, Rav Yecheskel, might walk past, but I don't see him. He's behind me. Okay? V'kum at mekayme, he's behind. You should get up. V'lo techush likora didi. And you should not be concerned that I'll wonder why you got up, and then I have to think it through, and then I'll have to get up. In other words, don't worry about my covet. You have to, you're honoring your father is so significant that it trumps your concern for my covet. They asked the following question. Banu v'hu rabo again. So that was the story. But what's the halacha? They asked, if the son is the Talmid Chacham and the father is his student, mahu sheyamid aviv mifanav. What about the father rising for the son in that circumstance? So Tashma, let's look into that. The Amr Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi once said, Ani eini kedai lama bifnei bani. It is inappropriate for me to have to stand for my father. Ella mishum kavod beis nasi. The only reason I do stand for my son is he's a son-in-law of the Nasi. He married a daughter of the Nasi. Okay? And Taima Da'ana Rabbe, if the reason that he should stand, if the reason is he should stand for his teacher, ha'ahu rabbi. If he was my teacher, kamino mekaime, I would stand for him. So the bottom line here is that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was embarrassed about standing for his son. He came up with an external excuse, but halacha l'maaseh, he did stand for his son, and I do stand for my son. You know, we have this little, he pops up, then I pop up, and then we don't, neither of us sits down for a while, and that's all, for Baruch Hashem, only in the morning. But okay. Hachi Kamar, here's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi meant. Ani eini kedai lama difnei bani. It's not appropriate for me to stand for my son. Va'afilu hu rabbi, even if he's my teacher, the ha'ana avuha, because I'm his father. And he calls me Avimari. I mean, I'm his teacher too when he was little. So he figures you don't have to. Ela mishum kavod beis nasi. I only stand because he's a son-in-law of the Nasi. Aboilahu, they asked a new question. We talked about the rabbi walking by. What if the rabbi is driving by? In those days, was on a donkey and going by, okay? So we're going to try and figure out if that's considered that you still have to show covet or not, okay? Rachov v'mahalech dami aloi is riding equivalent to walking. Amar Abaya Toshma, let's learn a story. This story is very complicated. Bottom line, a tree is a canopy, and if two people are under the tree, they're both affected by the canopy. So if there was a dead body, you'd have become tombe if you were under the tree. A mitzora can convey tuma if he's seated, but not if he's standing. Okay? And a rock that a tome handled becomes tome itself, but the rock has to again be stationary, be seated. If the rock is elevated or moving, it does not. Those are the ground rules for the next Maisa. Okay? Tashma, let's learn. Tome Yoshev Tachasa Ilan. A Tome Matzaira is sitting under a tree. The tahor made and a non-tame person, a tahor person is standing under the same tree. Tame. The tahor person becomes tame because of the seated mitzvah. Tame oime tachasil.
Because the tree is
as a canopy.
Canopy, right.
Okay. Tame. It would also be the same a ledge on, like the catwalk on our apartments, any overhang, including the branches of the tree. Tame ome tachas ilan. The tame is standing. The tahar yoshev, and the tahar person is seated. Tahar. Because the mitzvah is standing, it does not affect the tahar person to make him tummy. He stays tahar. V'im yashav hatame. But if the mitzvah then sits down, tahar tameh, the seated tahar guy automatically becomes tameh because now the mitzvah is seated. And the attitude of the tahar person is irrelevant. He can be standing, he can be seated. It's only when the tameh guy is seated. Now, the chen, the even, hamenugaas, the same thing applies if somebody is carrying a tameh stone. Now, obviously, the guy who's carrying the stone becomes tameh, but that's a lower level tumah. Okay? And therefore, if the carrier of the stone is seated, even though the stone is elevated, it creates tumah. If the carrier of the stone is standing, even though he has it down by his side, it is considered part of elevated and doesn't give tumah. So that's going to, that in some obscure manner, which I wasn't able to figure out, is going to tell us about whether your riding is called walking. The Omer of Nachman bar Kohen, Zoisameres, Rachov, Bamalech, Tami. That Mishnah about the Mitzorah and the Tahor guy teaches us that riding is the same as walking. Okay? And he says from the Bryce's ruling that a contaminated stone does not convey tumah when the person carrying it is standing. It's evident that it's the carrier, not the stone. So if you're in a carriage or you're on a donkey and the donkey's walking, you're walking. That's the best I could figure it out. Okay, Shema Mino. So we learned that riding is like walking. Iboilahu. So that means you have to stand when the Rebbe drives by in a car. Now it's a pretty quick stand because the car is moving along and you don't have to stand till it's Daled Amos. Okay. Iboilahu, new question. Maho lamed nifnei sefer Torah. You have to stand when they're in the presence of a sefer Torah. Rav Chilkiah, Rav Simon, Rabbi Elazar, Amrei, Kol V'chomer. They said you learn that you do stand for a sefer Torah from a Kal V'chomer. Mipnei loy medeho omdim. If you have to stand for someone who studies the Torah, mifonecho lo kol sheken, how much more so you should stand for the sefer Torah itself. Rav Aloy, Rav Yaakov bar Zivdi, Hava Yasve. They were sitting together learning Torah. Cholef Uzil Rav Shimon bar Abba. Rav Shimon bar Abba walked past and they stood up. Amar lahu, he said to them, there are two reasons that, I know you did the right thing, and I'll teach you something. There are two reasons to stand for me. Well, you should not, have stood for me. He was a lower level scholar, and yet they stood for him. So I have two reasons you shouldn't stand. Reason number one, Chada, the Asan, Chachime, you guys are Talmidei Chachamim, Va'ana Chover, and I'm a mere Chover. Va'oid, secondly, Klum Torah Amedes Mipnei Lamdeho. Does the Torah stand before its students? I learned from you. So how could you stand for me? Sober like Rebbe Lezer. So obviously we're following the Shita of Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Shimon holds the Shita of Rebbe Lezer. The Omer Rebbe Lezer. Ein Talmud Chacham Rashai Lamod Mipnei Rabo. Remember, we had this earlier. The student is not allowed to rise for his Rebbe, and now it's qualified. B'shasha Isek B'Torah. If the rising would interrupt their learning. Alayet Allah Abaya. But Abaya went nuts, and he strongly disagreed with this. According to Abaya, you always stand for your Rebbe, even if it interrupts your learning briefly. Pasuk says that the people nearby watched Moshe as he walked into the Ohel Moed. Rav Ami and Rav Yitzchak Nafka. So Rav Ami and Rav Yitzchak Nafka interpreted that pasuk in two diametrically opposite ways. Chad Omer Leganai. One of them said it was very negative. So the Mefarshim bring that Moshe was now pretty old, and gravity sort of settled his weight, and he had chunky thighs. And they were criticizing him. Look, Moshe eats so much food on our money. We're giving Meiser, and he's gobbling up food and grew fat. So it's an insult. V'chad omer l'shvach. The other said it was praising Moshe that he is so close to God that he can go in and out of the Ohel Moed as on a regular basis. Manda omer l'ganai k'de'isa. The one who interpreted it as a shameful behavior, and I just explained that. Manda omer l'shevach. The one who says it's shevach, it's good thing. Amar Chizkiah, because Chizkiah said, Amar li Rav Chanina bereid Rav Abu. Rav Chanina said to me in his father's name, Amar Rebbe Abuhu, Amar Rebbe, who quoted Rav Abdimi. Chacham Oiver, if a Chacham walks by, Amad Lefan of Dalet Amos, you stand as soon as he approaches you about 8 feet, Dalet Amos, the Kavan Sha'avar Dalet Amos Yoshev, and as soon as he's Dalet Amos past you, you're allowed to sit down again. But Bezdin Oiver, if the head of the Bezdin goes by, Ahmed Lefan of Moleena, you stand as soon as you can see him. The Kavan of Dalet Amos Yoshev, but once he's past you about 8 feet, you can sit down. Nasi Oiver, what if the Nasi approaches you? In our world, it would be a Gadol Hador. I made fun of Moleena. You stand as soon as he's at all visible. The Einu Yoshev ad the Yeshev bimkaimo, and you may not sit until he either is past you and gone and you can't see him anymore, or more likely you're in a shul say till he takes his seat, then everybody else can sit down. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, the Hebitu Achre Moshe ad Ba'o Oholah. They watched Moshe until he went into the tent. So obviously they remained standing until he was no longer visible. Okay, now we all right, we'll stop there. And I guess whoever's doing it tomorrow, tell them to pick up there. Okay. It's Hataras Nadarim now. So all right, Zeb, you stay seated.
Yeah.
Okay, Ruvain, move over. Take this, the Sidurim there, the Slichas book. Okay, the first round, Ruvain and Zeb and I'll be the Bezdin, and a few of you can do it together. I have 3 more Sforim there. Okay, it's right after today in this Sefer, page
452. 452.
wait a minute. 430, 445. Okay, it's somewhere around 450.
Right.
Okay, 452 in Hebrew, 3 in English. No, you guys should be standing. The reciters should stand.
We're doing it in English.
Okay. Okay, if you're doing in English, and some are in English and some are in Hebrew, let the English people go first, and then the Hebrew people can do together.
We will have to say this.
What? You all say the first part. If okay, when we do the Hebrew version, Mel, you can be Shmeya Ka'ona. You can listen, and he'll be motzi you. But if you're doing in English, everybody can do it for themselves.
Okay, ready? Okay. Listen, please, my masters, expert judges, every vow or oath or restriction that I adopted by use of the term konam or the term cherem that I vowed or swore while I was awake or in a dream, or that I swore by means of God's holy names, that is forbidden to erase, or by means of the names of Hashem, blessed be He, or in any form of Naziris that I accepted upon myself, except a Nazir of Shimshon, which does not include a prohibition against contact with the dead, or any prohibition, even a prohibition to derive enjoyment that I imposed upon myself or upon others by means of any expression of prohibition, whether by specifying the term prohibition or by using the term konam or cherem or any commitment, even to perform a mitzvah that I accepted upon myself, whether the term accepted was in terms of vow or voluntary gift or oath or nazirus, or by means of any sort of expression, or whether it was made final through a handshake or any form of vow or voluntary gifts or any custom that constitutes a good deed to which I've accustomed myself, and any utterance that escaped my mouth or that I vowed in my heart to perform any of the various optional good deeds or good practices, or any good thing that I have performed 3 times, but without specifying that the practice does not have the force of a vow, whether the thing I did related to myself or to others, both regarding vows that are known to me or those that I have already forgotten. Regarding all of them, I regret retroactively, and I ask and request of your eminences an annulment of them. My reason is that I am fearful that I will stumble and become entrapped, heaven forbid, in the sin of vows, oaths, zirim, cherem, prohibitions, konam, and violation of agreements.
But let me interrupt for a second. What we just read was chazakas. If you do something that's a good thing 3 times, that's as if you made a vow, unless you specifically say binli neder. So if any of you picked up a chazaka, you just undid it, and you can start over.
I do not regret, heaven forbid, the performance of good deeds I have done. Rather, I regret only having accepted them upon myself with an expression of a vow or oath or naziris or prohibition or cherem or konam or agreement or acceptance of the heart. And I regret not having said, behold, I do this without adopting terms of a vow, oath, nazirim, cherem, prohibition, konam, or acceptance of the heart. Therefore, I request annulment from all of them. I regret all the aforementioned, whether they were matters relating to money, or to whether they were matters relating to the body, or whether they were matters relating to the soul. Regarding them all, I regret the terminology of vow, oath, naziris, prohibition, cherem, konam, and acceptance of the heart. Now behold, according to the law, one who regrets and seeks annulment must specify the vows. But please be informed, my masters, that it's impossible to specify them because they are many. Nor do I seek annulment for those vows that cannot be annulled. Therefore, may you consider as if I had specified them.
Hakol Yomatorim Lach, Hakol Mukolim Lach, Hakol Shuriyim Lach, Ein Kan Lo Neder, Below Shua, below Nasiris, below Aaron, below Easter, below Kainim, below Nidoi, below Shematel Yom Avra. Ava, Yesh Behen Mechila, Aslicha, Kapara, Kashem, Shematirin, Bezdin, Shalmata, Kach Yula, Torim, Bezdin, Shalmaila. No, they say the rest. Hooray. Behold.
Okay, you don't say 3 times?
Okay.
You say 3 times.
Hakol Yematorim Lach, Hakol Mechorim Lach, Hakol Shruim Lach, Ein Kan Lo Neder, below Shua, below Nasiris, below Aaron, below Isser, below Kainim, below Nidoi, below Shamta, below Ora. Aval Yesh Kan Mechilas Filim Kapara, Keshem Shematirin Bezdin Shalmata, Kach Yula Torim Bezdin. Hakol Yomatorim Lach, Hakol Mukolim Lach, Hakol Shruim Lach, Ein Kan Lo Neder, below Shua, below Aaron, below Isser, below Kainim, below Nidoi, below Shmata, below Ora. Aval Yesh Kan Mechilas Filim Kapara, Keshem Shematirin Bezdin Shalmata, Kach Yula Torim Bezdin Shalmaila.
Behold, I make formal declaration before you, and I cancel from this time onward all vows and all oaths, naziris, prohibitions, konam, cherem, agreements, and acceptances of the heart that I myself will accept upon myself, whether while I am awake or in a dream, except for those vows to fast that I undertake during mincha. In case I forget the conditions of this declaration and I make a vow from this day onward, from this moment, I retroactively regret them and declare them that they are totally null and void, without effect and without validity, and they shall not take effect at all. Regarding all of them, I regret them from this time and forever.
Okay, so 3 of you sit and we will do it. If you can stay seated, sir. Oh, you're going to get it?
May I sit in your place?
Yeah, it's not my place. Okay.
I'm saying in Hebrew.
Okay, so you go first.
Shimon or Rabbi say, Dayanim Mumchachim, on the other Shvua, Yisra, Koinim, Cherev, Shinadarti, and Nishpati, Pockets of Bechaloma, Shinispati, Beshemus, Akadoshim, Sheinu, Nimchachim, Beshem, Avaya, Baruchu, Cham Mina, Nazira, Shikabauti, Olai, Chutzman, Nazira, Shimshon, Chalshum, Yisr, Afil, Isr, Handa, Shasarti, Olai, or Acherem, Bechal Loshin, Sho Isr, Bain Beloshin, Isr, or Cherem, or Koinim, the Chal Shum Kaboa Afil Shum Bitzra Shigibauti Alai Bain Beshum Bain Beloshin Neder Bain Beloshin Nadava Bain Beloshin Shmua Bain Beloshin Naziras Bain Bechol Loshin the Gam Hanas